people can be shocked and horrified and appalled, but I don't think anyone can claim to be surprised.
You know, someone who's Islamist was referred to prevent.
Keir Starmer can't round people up and say you've got to now go and do a parade for this or that. The culture has to change, and I don't think there's an appetite.
Every time you see one of these crimes, you just hope, is this going to be the one that shakes the government?
People coming over here from other places, they're not going to have the same standards of morality to us.
At the University of Oxford, he's a biochemist wearing these sort of comedy prosthetic breasts.
That instant should be fired instantly.
Hello and welcome to the Spike Podcast. I'm Fraser Myers and I'm joined as ever by Spike's editor, Tom Slater.
Hello.
And we're absolutely thrilled to be welcoming the host of Heretics, Andrew Gold. Welcome.
Hello, what a pleasure to be here. It's been too long, hasn't it, that I haven't yet been on here.
It's been way too long and we're so glad that you're with us because we've got loads to discuss today and stuff that's right up your street. We will be talking about the Golders Green terror attack, the relentless asylum seeker crime wave, and the bearded Oxford tutor with huge plastic breasts. So a lot of variety there. Before we get on to all of that, I just want to remind everyone about the Spiked Summit. We only have 20% of tickets left. So if you've been thinking about wanting to go, get your ticket now. Don't think, because also we're going to announce some more guests very soon, and then it probably will sell out. So please get your ticket now. Tom, do you want to fill people in with more details if they haven't heard about the summit?
Yes, exactly. So the summit, it's our biggest event ever. It's going to be at the Emmanuel Centre on Saturday, the 27th of June. You've already seen some of the speakers we've got announced. Our own Brendan O'Neill, of course, Lionel Shriver, Constantine Kissin, Catherine Burblesing, Toby Young, much else besides. If you want to get your ticket, move quickly, because as Fraser says, they're going very fast. So spiked-online.com/events. And if you're a Spiked supporter, make sure you log in because you can get a very healthy discount. So once again, spiked-online.com/events.
On Wednesday, 2 Jewish men were stabbed in Golders Green in North London. The police are treating this as a terror attack. Tom, this is another brutal attack. It's shocking, but sadly unsurprising at this stage.
And I think that's exactly it, because people can be shocked and horrified and appalled, but I don't think anyone can claim to be surprised. There's been a sort of steady drumbeat of menacing, non-violent attacks that we've seen in the run-up to this. String of arson attacks in northwest London, not too far from where this stabbing took place. Synagogue in Finchley, synagogue in Harrow. There was a business which used to be a Jewish charity, still had the logo on the front, which was also targeted by a firebombing attack. And then everyone kind of turns around and thinks, oh, how did this possibly happen? The fact that there has been this complacency is even more shocking, given the fact that it was only last October that you had the Heaton Park terror attack when Jihad al-Shami slashed at worshippers, leaving 2 people dead as a consequence of that. And also, it was only earlier this year. Everyone has completely forgotten about this now, but that enormous plot that was foiled in Manchester, these 2 foreign-born ISIS fanatics who were trying to get their hands on AK-47s. It could have been our Bondi Beach. It would have easily been one of the worst Islamist terrorist attacks we'd ever suffered, and it would have been fueled exclusively by Jew hatred. That's completely gone by the wayside. So I think the anger is so much more palpable this time around because the authorities, the government can't claim that they weren't warned. As I say, there was a steady drumbeat towards what happened on Golders Green this week, and only people who are willfully blind to it or ignoring it for other political reasons, shall we say, could claim to have been surprised by this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Andrew, the rise of Jew hatred is now relentless, it seems.
Yeah, well, I can understand it. We're quite annoying, and I'd hate us as well. No, look, it's a hard one to talk about oneself, and I'm happy that we've got. I suppose I hate to use the word allies because you sound woke. Or people like you, and Jews have always liked that. The Jewish people in general didn't go down the whole kind of cultural appropriation route. If someone wants to play a Jew in a film and that kind of thing, although nowadays they are starting to go, well, hang on, why is it not okay with other people, but it is with us? But we've always enjoyed that. I think partly because we're such a small minority. There's hardly any of us, and I do start to feel like. There's a lot of whatever it is, anger or ideology in the Islamic community, if we call it a community. There's a lot of very extreme, very angry people. They're going to get through the Jews quite quickly. And so it's important for me to make the point to people listening who are not Jewish and who might be going, well, it's not really my fight. I don't really care. Like, you're next. That's happening next. So it's first the Jews, or what do they say? First the Saturday people, then the Sunday people. So there aren't that many of us to get through. The Haredi Jews are the ones who are taking the brunt of it right now, because those are the guys who are outwardly Jewish looking. They are very, very, very different. I can't stress enough how different they are as people, beliefs, and all of those things to the Jewish people that people listening might know, like David Baddiel or me or various other, I don't know, Winona Ryder. I can't think. The cast of Friends, Seinfeld. These are totally different kinds of people. People who, in some ways, I would say, especially at the extreme ends, are quite cultish in and of themselves. But they have nothing to do with Israel, really. They're not really bothered by Israel, those people. Some of them actually actively dislike it. But they're the ones that are going to take the brunt of this at the moment. And they're the ones suffering right now, in Golders Green in particular.
And Tom, I mean, the suspect, you can almost play a game of bingo with some of the things that have been coming out. There are very limited things we know, but someone who's Islamist was referred to prevent mental health problems, yet seemingly allowed to roam the streets. This IRGC offshoot has claimed responsibility as well, so there's the Iranian angle to it. I mean, the patterns are just repeated and repeated, and yet it seems as if nothing is really being done to confront this.
No, exactly. And I always think it's worth stressing that the growing Jew hatred in this country and across the West was building well before October the 7th as well. I mean, the sewers have burst since then, and you can't ignore it now because you've got the bi-monthly hate marches and the kinds of out there explicit headline-grabbing attacks that we've seen of late. But this has been going on for a very long time. I mean, Kemi Badenoch got in a bit of trouble the other week when she was talking about how if this was a series of black churches which had been arson attacked, people would be in outrage, there would be marches and so on and so forth. And that if anything, the level of anti-Semitism experience is of a completely different order to the kind of ambient racism that other groups might be experiencing, without wanting to play into any kind of hierarchy of victimhood. She's absolutely right. I mean, this is something that actually the head of Greater Manchester Police made this point quite recently in the wake of Heaton Park and all the rest of it. Jews are the only community in the UK who expect to have to send their children to school behind high walls with security guards, with regular police patrols. Again, even before October the 7th, Jews make up about 0.5% of the population of England and Wales, I think, and they are the victims of a quarter of all religiously motivated hate crimes, a vexed category, but nevertheless it gives you some kind of indication. There would be stories about Jewish cemeteries being desecrated time and time and time again, would barely break out of the local news. This willful blindness towards it, you see it particularly on the left, and we might get into the brickbats which have been sent Zach Polanski's way in the wake of this particular atrocity. But even in general, I think society's been very blasé about it because of the fact it doesn't really fit the script. It doesn't fit the identitarian script. It doesn't really make sense, even though it's staring them right in the face.
Yeah, I mean, we should talk a little bit about the politics, as you say. Keir Starmer has gone down to Golders Green on the day that we're recording this, receiving huge boos from the crowd. The local Labour MP was also booed yesterday on the day of the attack, as was the head of the Met Police, Mark Rowley. And as you said, Tom, Zach Polanski, although Starmer always, every politician, I guess, condemns these kinds of attacks. Even Zach Polanski has condemned this attack, despite only saying not that long ago that we need to have a conversation as to whether the threat to Jewish people is real or perceived.
Yeah,
which
that was
is
last week.
That was only last week.
Yeah. That wasn't,
which is an astonishing. It's an astonishing thing to say, especially given all the evidence that is mounting up. But I think he can't be allowed to get away with that, surely, after this.
An even greater example, even more egregious example of what you're talking about, and what Kemi said, I think, is when those two Jewish comedians, were not able to perform in Edinburgh Fringe Festival. That to me was almost, in some respects, I mean, obviously not actually worse, because I'm not talking about physical attacks, but that was a moment of absolute silence afterwards. Nobody cared. That we literally had evidence of something people have been saying has been happening, which is Jews have been pushed to the side for a long time. We had evidence and people being public and honest about it. That, we just couldn't have them on. Not my fault. It's because it wasn't safe. Some of the bar staff didn't want to work with a Jew there. Whether that's because they didn't want to be in proximity of a Jew, or whether they thought, oh, this is dangerous, other people are going to attack them. And that should have been the moment. That would have been a George Floyd moment. Again, not an actual death in that moment. But if there was a moment where two black comedians were not allowed to play or do a gig or whatever because they are black, And some will say it's a religion or whatever. These two Jewish comedians didn't talk about Israel. They were not Zionists, really, or they might be privately. They don't talk about those things. It was purely because of their ethnic Jewishness or whatever. They were not allowed to play. I mean, that's Nazi Germany stuff. Now, it's one thing that happening, but the way that news story we just moved on, the way that most people in the street don't even know that happened, that's happening all over the place now. Jews can't do. I came here, and it would have been much quicker for me to just get a tube through London. I can't get the tube now because people scream genocide, baby killer at me. And I don't speak about Israel much on the podcast. I really haven't done for quite a long time. It's really not a big part of my podcast at all. Again, as I've said before, I like when others speak for Jews. When you do it yourself, I feel it's a bit whiny, it's a bit self-interested. You're not going to convince people because they're going, well, you've clearly got a bias. So I'll talk about being Jewish culturally, but I don't do so much on what we're talking about now. It's nice having you guys do it, but that doesn't stop me or Matt Lucas recently, for example, being bothered on the tube and shouted at. We're in a really dire situation. But the thing is, where I have some sympathy, and people won't like me saying this, with Keir Starmer and with that local MP, well, what the hell do you do? What can you do? I'm reminded of that. There was the paedophile hospital, had a strange name, where Louis Theroux went in. He was documenting people. He wasn't interned. Yeah, he hadn't been admitted.
Big news story. Yeah,
Made that very clear. But he was doing a documentary there, and they had this weird situation where it was like, well, look, these guys are behaving well in here, but we can never let them out. So what do we do? Do we go around finding the 1%, and arguably it's much more than 1% of Muslims in this country who equate to 10% of the population, or some say less, some say it might be significantly more. We'll find out at the next census. And take them and put them somewhere and they never come out again because we can't quite trust them. How do we find out without going into people's WhatsApps and things? Basically, how do we get a hold on this without becoming the authoritarian countries that have gotten a hold on this, such as the Emirati countries? That's what we have to become, do we? So I don't even know what we can do. I don't know what you guys think.
A strange thing on the pro-Palestine side, which sees any interference with those carnivals of Jew hatred as some sort of crackdown on free expression, even though these people are at the forefront of cracking down on free expression. Putting kind of limits on those kinds of demonstrations and saying where they can and cannot go and at what frequency is not, the right to protest is not an absolute, and there's a lot of kind of phony war on that. But you're right, there are some people who would want to see a kind of much more substantial response in the form of cracking down on protest, cracking down on speech. You understand where that comes from, but ultimately I think it is a fool's errand for the reason that you can't confront bigotry through censorship, and that is the lesson of history. The discussion this week has become about we need action, not words. So therefore, the conversation becomes, what are the actions going to be? It strikes me that even before we get into some of the more drastic solutions people might be contemplating, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit. I mean, it's obvious that there has been a remarkable disparity, two-tier if you want to call it, in relation to the policing of and even prosecution and conviction of clear-cut violence and menace inflicted upon the Jewish community. You remember that guy who showed up at I believe it was a Jewish deli with a knife. He basically got off.
suspended sentence. Yeah,
Exactly.
So basically walked through.
Slap on the wrist.
Yeah,
The Labour councillor who's cut the throats of Zionists, which we know what that means by Zionists.
Exactly.
He just got off, didn't he?
And even when you get into kind of thorny questions of speech, which obviously we're pretty fundamentalist on those questions, you can't but notice the disparity. I mean, again, this is before October the 7th, that convoy of cars that was driving around Finchley Road, I believe, chanting what basically, it's almost foreseeing what was going to happen on October the 7th, kill the Jews, rape their mothers, rape their daughters. Nothing happened. I mean, again, this was something that was, I think in that case, eventually dropped. And then if you also think about the broader issue with not cracking down on the Iranian threat, which again has been there for a long time, on top of the fact that maybe we should stop importing people who are quite clearly not only anti-Semitic, but Islamist and so on and so forth. There's a hell of a lot you could do. And also, without suggesting this all just comes down to rhetoric and solidarity, it would go a hell of a long way if, when something like this happens, you did see a mass demonstration of all the supposed anti-racist and anti-fascist. That one they had the other month was in response to reform topping the polls, essentially. And yet Jews are killed in Jewish North London, and you get from Zach Polanski, who led that demonstration, one perfunctory tweet, as you mentioned, which didn't use the words Jews or anti-Semitism at all, and then a whole stream of having a go at people for daring to suggest that his party might, in terms of some of the people who've washed up in it, put it that way, be part of the problem. So all of these things put together, which would demonstrate that this is not to be accepted, but also to take actions which would limit the threat that exists, to police properly. It seems to me there's a lot that could quite easily be done without changing the law, without becoming a very different society, which hasn't been done, which begs the question why.
But some of that's about the culture. I mean, Keir Starmer can't round people up and say, you've got to now go and do a parade for this or that. The culture has to change. And I don't think there's an appetite. There just isn't an appetite. And it's happened before regarding Jews, obviously. But in this case, it's a very pro-Islam issue right now. And I do want to hammer that home again to people. This is about Islam. I don't think it's Jews are the first thing. I mean, the issue in Islam is far, far deeper than people realize. The average person in particular. Everybody wants to believe that we're signed up to this kind of cult of multiculturalism. And that means that everybody's a blank slate and everybody's the same deep down and we all just want the same kinds of things. But if anyone who knows just an average, normal Muslim family, not everyone in that family, but many of them will have discussions. People will grow up in an atmosphere where they will speak about Jews eating the blood of babies. That is just very, very normal in many, and that they won't. That will not even be contentious to say that. And sure, some people say not in my family that didn't happen. I think that those people will be few and far between. It is more common than uncommon for that to be the discussion, not just eating babies, but who knows what other kinds of horrible, horrible things. I test this. I get in taxis and Ubers and things, and I have the conversations, and I ask them like, "Hey, what do you think about the Jews?" They don't know I'm Jewish, and yeah, those are very, very normal things to be said in those communities. It feels to me like the problem was we could have sorted this out 20 years ago, and I think it's almost too late now. Well, okay, you can tell people to do they're not going to do it. I mean, ultimately, we've got, as I said, 10% of the country now potentially is Muslim. They feel angry. Those Muslims, they're angry because they're growing up in a world and they're going, look, these Jews eat babies. These other white people are degenerates and they hate us, and so they're angry. And they now hold power and influence. I know that was the stereotype about the Jews, of course. The fact is, it's just a numbers game. And that numbers game, okay, 10% of our society, but that was accelerated through DEI. So 10% of society will be a higher percentage within TV channels. So we know that's true, that minorities are way overrepresented on our TV channels, which means that pretty much everybody working at the BBC right now and all the news stations will know a disproportionate number of Muslims, many of whom have grown up with this idea of Jews eating baby blood and so forth, and who will be a little bit influenced by them because those are their friends who they're having lunch with and sharing things with. And that will be true in our political sphere as much as it is in our cultural and our TV and our news and all of that. So I don't want to sound too defeatist here. I don't think we can actually win this. And the historical precedent shows that we don't win this because throughout the Middle East, everywhere that Islamism grew, Jews were pushed out first and then Islam took over the country. I'm yet to hear and I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. I've yet to hear a very good argument for why we are, okay, there are some differences, but why we are so exceptional that we will not fall to the same thing that happened in the Middle East.
And just on that point, because it's important to not tiptoe around this discussion, because people have tiptoed around it for a very long time. If you talk about the kind of rise of militant Jew hatred, yes, there's a component of that, which is the supposedly anti-imperialist left. Yes, there is this tiny, tiny fringe of far-right knuckle draggers still knocking around, but we know where the main problem is coming from. Incidentally, it was easy to talk about this even 10 or 15 years ago. Mehdi Hassan, of all people, wrote a piece for the New Statesman saying that kind of dinner table anti-Semitism was the British Muslim community's dirty secret, as he put it. You look at any poll or surveys, the tendency to agree with anti-Semitic tropes is much more pronounced amongst British Muslims. We're not necessarily talking about a majority, but we're talking about a very sizable minority there. And what's interesting is Rakib Assam, one of our columnists, has done some good research on this. It is also very much tracks along with how well integrated are those Muslims and those Muslim communities. If they tend to know Jewish people, if they tend not to live in as kind of siloed parts of the country, again, the take up of those attitudes is much lower. So there are clearly things that could be done. And as we were talking about earlier, there are clearly things that we could probably stop doing in terms of making the problem worse. But we're at the point now where it's harder to talk about that now than it even was 10 or 15 years ago, which suggests that we're even further away from sorting it, to your point.
Even though the situation's much, much worse now, obviously by every metric. We had the Stacey Dooley documentary 15, 20 years ago. We had Channel 4 doing this amazing journalistic work where they went into the mosques and exposed the imams who were preaching Jew hate and white hate and all these kinds of hate in their religious centers. That was just, it was known 15 to 20 years ago that it was very common in Muslim communities and in religious spheres of the Muslim community to preach hate. That was a known thing. It was spoken about, and journalists were able to look into it. And we went beyond what I would call the event horizon, where, with a black hole, that's the point where light can no longer come back out because the gravity is so strong. We're so far into the Islamization of this country that we can no longer, even on the BBC and mainstream publications, talk about the situation, because it's been, to an extent, infiltrated by the very people that it was being exposed.
It's the editorial policy, essentially, to be anti-Semitic. Let's move on to talk about a similar problem. We did talk about the small boats briefly in the last subject, but it has been an extraordinary number of really horrific crimes. Again, it seems these are much more easily preventable, and yet they persist. Probably most notably, last week, 3 men who arrived on a small boat were found guilty of gang raping a woman in Brighton. We had a Iraqi teenager, 3 months after arriving in the UK, rape one of his schoolmates. He's been let off, but can just on the condition that he attends a consent class. There's been all kinds of other horrific crimes. A man charged in Plymouth with raping a local as well, just this week. Tom, again, this feels like it's relentless. It feels like it's quite easily preventable. Simply enforcing the law might do the trick. But the political class feels totally helpless. They're wailing around, not able to do anything.
No, exactly. And all they can do is try to minimize it or put it in perspective. But the thing is, any crime committed by an illegal migrant, or as we're compelled to call them, asylum seekers, is by definition a preventable crime. And if you're talking about sexual violence, rape, paedophilia, that's a crime that surely there should be clear desire to prevent any and all of those crimes. Because of the muddle that we got ourselves into with our asylum system, that seems to be impossible. But there is a story like this almost every week now. I think the Brighton one really cut through, not least because of the images. One of the convicted rapists coming out of Hove Crown Court, sweatshirt draped lightly over his face, grinning from ear to ear. Some of the details in that case, I don't want to get salacious about it, but kind of laughing while filming it. The victim in particular saying that she's haunted in particular by his face, laughing and seeming to revel in what was going on in front of him. And it comes back again to the sort of willful naivety, I suppose. 2 of these scumbags were from Egypt. There's noted problems with sexual violence in a country like Egypt. It's not as pronounced as somewhere like Afghanistan, but still pretty bad. There was this phenomenon during the Arab Spring where you'd have gangs of men roaming around and groping and trying to undress women. Even earlier than that, at Eid celebrations, these are things that you would read kind of concerned NGO statements about. And yet the idea that some people from that culture would come over here, enter illegally, again, no checks, no whatever, and that won't be a consideration, that cultural problem will just melt away, is absurd. And the fact that the man in question, the one who was grinning from ear to ear as he left court, it seems like was fleeing murder charges in Egypt itself.
Yeah.
So you would think at this point this would crack the edifice and all of the nonsense which is said about this. They're fleeing war, they're fleeing persecution. Many of them are fleeing charges in other countries. Many of them are fleeing the fact that they've been refused asylum in many other countries. Many of these are just, a non-negligible proportion of them will be young men floating around Europe looking for the softest touch.
Yeah.
And even these stories don't tend to crack that narrative. And then you just hear sort of warm words about, of course, we need to get on top of this, whilst not having any appetite for going to the ECHR or the things that could actually sort this. And also kind of talk about integration as if, you're going to bring in a 17, 18-year-old, 21-year-old who, in the words of one of these scumbags, saw rape as sex, and give them a consent class and everything's going to be fine. I don't think communities up and down this country are willing to take that bet, to take that risk, to say it'll all be all right if we show them a PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah.
But we're expected to believe that is the solution, rather than just stopping people from coming to the country illegally and only allowing in those who we can be sure who they are, broadly speaking, and what their intentions might be. Is that really so complicated?
Yeah, Andrew, every time you see one of these crimes, you just hope, is this going to be the one that shakes the government, the establishment out of their complacency? But no, I'm sure we're going to hear about how these men, and they are overwhelmingly men, unattached, all of a similar kind of age, are actually, they're the vulnerable ones. We're the ones that have to, should accommodate them, etc., etc. The don't be racist, don't be stoking division in drawing attention to this problem.
So multiculturalism is I think it's a cult basically. And I think some sort of cult experts take issue with this because they want a hard and fast line of like, this is a cult, this is not a cult. This person has so Scientology is a cult because it has a leader at the top of it and advice. And whereas I take the view that everything is cultish, it's on a spectrum, sort of 1 to 10. So your local book club might be a 2 out of 10 because you feel a little bit like, oh, I can't really say what I really think here. If I say the wrong words, I'm going to be pushed out. Those are the kinds of things that I think make it cultish. And multiculturalism, the way it's taken hold, it may not have a specific leader. I mean, people will have ideas of who that maybe Tony Blair was the, in this particular country or whoever it might be, but it doesn't have a specific leader. And it's not quite culty in the same way as Scientology, but I would say it's very cultish as an ideology, and it's enticing. It really makes you feel good about yourself, because I think what it's basically saying is that morality it sort of takes the place of God, multiculturalism, because morality is written into us, that we are all moral, and we, like, no matter where we're from, and we can all come and we all have the same ideas. And anyone who's seen that Ross Kemp clip, have you seen that, where he interviews 3 guys and he says, why do you not rape people? And these 3 guys from a different, I can't remember what culture they're from, but totally different culture from us. And they're trying to respond and give the right answer for about 5 minutes. And he's going, no, but why shouldn't you rape people? And they're going, I suppose because like my mum won't like it. No, but why else shouldn't you rape women? I suppose I could get in trouble. And they can't even get themselves to a point where they begin to understand that it's horrible for the woman. That's not even on their radar because it's a different culture. So, I mean, I feel like I went away. I lived abroad for about 12 to 15 years in various different countries that were all sort of Western. I don't know if Colombia is sort of Western countries, but they were also different. They're nowhere near as different as the Middle East or Africa, but different. And every single day I lived that in terms of, I'm in Argentina today. These people will respond differently to me, like to how British people would. If I say a different thing, they might think it's offensive. They might not, and so on. They will have a very different viewpoint on pretty much every topic because they've grown up in a different culture. So to me, it feels natural that to understand that people from different places have different points of view and different ways of thinking, and you can't just change it like that. It's almost impossible to do. So I just think, again, it's about appetite. There is not an appetite in the UK for people who are part of this multicultural cult to begin to consider, firstly, the sunk cost fallacy, the fact that they've gone in so hard on this, and it might be, the worst thing they could have done. What they thought was being helpful was actually leading to rapes, murders, and all the most horrible, horrible things. Nobody's going to admit that to themselves. But also they would then have to admit that, hey, well, where does morality even come from then? For tens of thousands of years, humans were engaged in slavery. That was absolutely fine. We've now decided it's not. Now, I also think it's not good. It's okay, slavery's bad, right?
Glad you cleared that up.
I've cleared that up because the word on the street is quite different.
I've got a
Make
few
it
at
up.
home, but
Yeah.
no, but even that, I don't want to sound like a postmodernist woke person here, but even that is subjective. They decided in pretty much we're the anomaly. Every culture ever decided that slavery was fine, and we're the anomaly right now that said actually it's not. So I'd like to think we're right, but the point is that this stuff doesn't come from a cult of multicultural. It doesn't come from whatever. So people coming over here from other places, they're not going to have the same standards of morality to us. We're not even necessarily right. There's no right. It's just this is how we're living our life in the West. If they want to be part of it, they've got to be able to adapt to the West. And I'm sorry, but most of them can't. They simply can't do it and won't.
Well, I think there's no expectation anymore that people will adapt. I mean, you don't even, again, if we're talking about illegal immigrants in particular, there's no expectation. Already we've demonstrated to them they don't have to follow our laws. They will be rewarded for not following our laws, for just coming in unannounced. That will be to their benefit. It's actually seen as racist to expect people to conform to the same standards as everyone else. So I think there's actually there's a lot of there's a lot of barriers that are put up in the way of integration that might be possible in a different if the UK in 2026 were different, but we happen to be in a place where everything is saying actually your culture is better. Western culture, British culture is actually evil, and you are right to shun it and to follow your own instincts.
Sandra, I think the whole multicultural project, particularly in the extremity to which it operates now, is premised on the idea that they can't possibly. So that all you can do is accommodate the society to them. They should have their own representatives. They might even have their own parallel legal system. They would have this, they would have that. Because the idea of joining and integrating into not just following the laws, which should be a pretty fundamental thing, but actually participating in a kind of shared culture is beyond them, or it's an imposition, or why would you want to integrate into that anyway? Because we're just steeped in sin and historical scandal. So again, it's the lopsidedness of it is fascinating. So even before you kind of get into a question of integration, which is what everyone, at least in mainstream politics, will eventually alight upon, you have to agree that there's something worth integrating into. And they don't seem to think that there is, most, to be frank, let alone be willing to do what it would take to make that integration work.
So someone was explaining the difference the other day between integration and assimilation, and it's a semantic issue really. It's fairly nuanced, but I think it could be helpful. Is that integration is not actually what we would necessarily want, because it would mean integrating them and their culture into ours, which is kind of when integration does happen, that's how it happens. Whereas assimilation would be that they become part of who we are. They might look different and they might have different ancestry. They might even do things at home that are a little bit different, like maybe they pray to some sort of god back home and eat the foods and the whatever else from some other back home or ancestral home. But out in public, they are like the West. They act and behave as the people in Britain did in the 1990s, or as many of us still do today. So that would be, I guess, many of our preference that people do that. And if you go to Japan, you're expected very much to do that. When I was in Argentina, I was certainly expected to do that. I couldn't just run around being all British, whatever that might mean. It would piss people off. It would rub people up the wrong way. I had to wait till like 10 p.m. to have dinner, because that's when they all want to have dinner. I can't just be popping over there saying, God, I'm hungry at 6 p.m. So that's it. But
Where's my fish and chips?
where's my fish and chips? There was actually a fish and chips place right next door where I lived. It was owned by some English guy out in Buenos Aires. So. But there isn't one on every single street.
Yeah.
Like in the entirety of Argentina.
Shall we talk about the Oxford tutor with massive fake tits and a beard? Matt Ratley has his various photos of him have been setting the internet alight. There's no suggestion that this person is transgender, by the way. He does not identify as a woman, but does turn up to lots of, I think, tutorials and certainly lectures and public events at the University of Oxford. He's a biochemist, wearing these sort of comedy prosthetic breasts, and he's got kind of a full beard and balding. I don't know what you guys make of it. I think it's
My browsing history is full of that man.
It's a delightful sight.
I think, again, not to sort of dwell on it too much, but that you might call it multiculturalism or just postmodernism or whatever. Everyone's a blank slate. We can all do what we want and so on. And lovely, lovely idea, utopian ideal. I mean, maybe it's not lovely, actually. It's quite sort of Aldous Huxley, isn't it? It's quite Brave New World, and we're all just a blank slate, and whatever the culture is, nothing seems to matter. And not only culture, but your sex. You could be a man, you could be a woman. And obviously the issue with it, aside from it just being a really banal and boring way to have a society, the issue is always that there's going to be a percentage of horrible, horrible people. That's always been the problem for humanity since we started making settlements. There's always been 1 to 5% of us have been urchins who just want to ruin it for everyone else. It's just a fact. And so there will be guys who, unfortunately, lovely idea, we can all be men, or even though you can't, there will be some guys who have fetishes and who, I mean, this guy, I don't want to make claims about what he's really thinking, because who knows? But I mean, I think I will do that and just say, yeah, he's got a fetish. He's going around with breasts on. We would have recognized that 20 years ago, as this is a man with a fetish who's now playing out his sexual fantasy in front of young, vulnerable students whose work he presumably marks. And there's a power differential why he goes around doing that. I was talking before we got on about a guy who was fired for hugs. He was hugging people in his office during the Me Too movement. Now you've got a guy teaching at Oxford who's got fake tits out everywhere. That should be fired instantly. Probably should be arrested. Public indecency, like that's mental. But I don't know. What do you think?
Ted Bakerman should have identified as a woman or something, and then it might have been a lot harder to get rid of him. Yeah, unless it could be I hope it's a practical joke.
I was about to say that.
Yeah.
Like, you can only hope that it's just an elaborate practical joke, like a genius bit of almost absurdist political statement to say, will they even accept this? You know, will they even allow me to do this?
What about there was an American one,
Yeah,
wasn't
the
there?
Canadian.
Yeah,
Canadian.
Kyla something.
Kyla Lemieux, and even bigger, actually, much bigger breasts.
You know these very well.
I
You know the
I'm
names.
very familiar. No, all the big-breasted transgender teachers. Yeah,
He's writing a history of this.
that was a what's it? What do they call it? A shop teacher.
Yeah.
And,
Oh, like the woodwork. Sort of,
woodwork,
yeah,
yeah.
DT or whatever we would call it.
Yeah, and I think it was I don't know. It was suspected that he might have actually been a sort of 4chan member and was trying to see what he could get away with, and he certainly got away with a lot because the school really rallied to his defence as soon as the pictures started going up.
Because that's the thing, there are only kind of three coherent explanations, one of which is it is an elaborate prank. The other which is this person's just severely mentally ill. The final one is that it's some sort of fetish. Either way, this should not be tolerated in the workplace. You know, like if he came to work in a gimp suit, would that be completely acceptable? You know, if he came to work insisting that he was actually Postman Pat and refused to be, addressed by anything other than that, would that maybe come up at some sort of future, kind of appraisal meeting and say, you know what, this is actually getting in the way of other people's learning and work. You might have to calm this down or work somewhere else. But no, because of the muddle that we've got ourselves into, any claim must be either accepted or just kind of politely ignored and allowed to carry on, because you can't have such a thing as standards, particularly when it comes dressed up in something which at least looks like gender or sexuality or something. Even if it's not quite that, what else is going on? That just is the free pass, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah, it just dips its toe into the gender thing, and then everyone has to freeze. Bring your whole self to work. Do you think is that a good idea?
As a woodwork guy, do you think the breasts make his wood work?
Oh.
Not going to get a better ending than that.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Andrew, and thank you to everyone watching at home. But that is not all, because look out for the Spiked Podcast Unlocked.
On the left, there is such a sense of moral superiority that is a way that a human being can convince themselves to do the worst thing ever. They can only do such terrible things if they are that convinced of their moral superiority.
Thank you so much for watching the Spike Podcast. We'll be back next week, so make sure you subscribe to the channel and click the bell so you never miss an episode. If you enjoyed the Spike Podcast, then why not check out what else our channel has to offer, from our documentaries to our weekly interviews and podcasts like The Brendan O'Neill Show. And if you're a Spike supporter, you can watch the second half of this episode by logging in on the Spiked website. If you're not yet a Spike supporter, then why not sign up now? You'll get unlimited access to the website, ad-free reading, discounted tickets to our events, and so much more. So become a Spike supporter today by going to spiked-online.com/support. That's spiked-online.com/support.